place was huge and pretty impressive, I had to admit. Strangely, the modern outside hid an interior that looked like an ancient castle, kind of like those fancy sets you see in movies sometimes. It was basically a Victorian take on what a medieval castle might look like, but they probably couldn't have built something so grand back in the real old days. I was certain that if I were the one paying for the wedding, it wouldn't have been in such a place. But my ex-wife, Shona, made sure that would never happen years ago. I thought I had found a quiet spot for myself, tucked away in a sort of minstrel's gallery that also served as a lighting tower and projection room where I could watch the ceremony without being seen by anyone below in the main hall. I knew if people found out I was there, it would cause some serious drama and probably lead to a tense showdown between my ex-in-laws and me. Plus, I was pretty sure my daughter wouldn't be too thrilled about it either. I figured Tamsin would be even less happy than her mom, the witch, and her sidekick husband, George, about my unexpected appearance. But there I was, quietly hiding in the back of the minstrel's gallery, where I could watch my estranged daughter's wedding. Then suddenly, I heard a voice whisper right next to me, "Hey there, good looking. I knew you wouldn't miss this little party." That voice startled me so much that I jumped off the fishing stool I was sitting on and ended up crashing to the floor. I thought I'd be less noticeable sitting low on that stool, peering through the balustrade bars. The noise of the stool hitting the floor was loud enough to draw everyone's attention. From my awkward position on the ground, I looked up to see Trouble standing over me. She was my daughter's embarrassed aunt, making frantic apologetic gestures to the people below. Trouble, or Megan, as she's formally known, was my ex-wife's mischievous younger sister, and she had a knack for causing trouble, even back in the day. Now, my hiding spot had become the center of attention for everyone in the building. The bride, groom, officiant, photographer, choir, and most of the guests were all staring up at Megan with annoyed or confused looks on their faces. I pressed myself flat on the floor, hoping no one had spotted me. Megan signaled for the service to continue, then sat on my stool. From down there, I couldn't see much, but I could hear the wedding going on. I hoped everyone would just think it was one of Megan's usual antics. She was known for her wild behavior in the family, even as a kid. "It's okay, you can watch now," Megan whispered. "Sorry for scaring you, Billy. You scared the life out of me. Where'd you learn to sneak up like that, Megan?" I whispered back, adjusting to see what was happening. Well, it looked like I'd lost my stool for the time being. "I picked it up as a kid, sneaking up on some lovers," she said with a wink. "You little troublemaker." "I'm not so little now, Billy. Watch out or I might sweep you off your feet later." "No way, Megan. I'm out of here as soon as I can." Megan glanced at me, then gestured towards the service, indicating we'd talk later. I always had a soft spot for Shona's little sister, Megan. Sure, she could be a pain sometimes during Shona and my courtship, but compared to Shona, I was more tolerant of Megan's antics. Megan seemed like a good-hearted kid who just wanted attention. With 4 years between the sisters, there was bound to be some conflict. I figured Megan didn't quite grasp the need for privacy that Shona and I had. Once the ceremony ended, I tried to catch a glimpse of the groom as he led Tamsin out of the hall, but staying hidden made it tough. The groom seemed like a decent guy from what I could see. Luckily, everyone seemed too focused on the newlyweds to notice the minstrel's gallery. But as soon as they were out of sight, Megan started pulling me up. "Come on, Billy, we need to head to the dining room." I resisted, wanting to stay hidden until the coast was clear. "Megan, I can't risk going to that reception. I could end up in serious trouble." "Don't be silly, Billy. It's your daughter's wedding. Why would you get arrested?" "Well, there's that restraining order against me," I protested. "No, Billy. Shona's gone now, and she's the only one named in that order. When she passed, the order became invalid." "What do you mean, she passed?" I asked, shocked. "It was an accident, right?" "Billy, that jerk always drove recklessly. He's still a disaster waiting to happen behind the wheel. Do you know how fast he was going that day?" "I don't know much about it, Megan. I saw those skid marks on the road, Billy. He was driving like a complete idiot that night, just like he always does. I can't believe he wasn't charged for ending my sister. Even Tamsin knows he's to blame for her mom's death. You noticed he wasn't there today, right? He wasn't invited." "I wasn't invited either, Megan." "Yes, you were, sort of. I just couldn't find you to let you know. Look, my invite says, Miss Megan Stone and guest. No restrictions or anything. Guess who my guest is going to be?" I chuckled. "You're kidding, Megan. Me show up at a Stone wedding? Been there once, remember, and you know how that turned out." My sister being foolish doesn't change things, Billy. You're Tamsin's dad, and damn, you should have been there today walking her down the aisle. Not her grandpa. Now you and I are going to the reception together, and I don't want to hear any excuses about restraining orders. My Uncle Albert says there's no legal reason for you not to come as my guest. Actually, he thinks it's a great idea. He was always on your side, even when things got messy. I wondered why he didn't represent Shona, I remarked. Listen, Billy, if Uncle Albert thought he could, he would have represented you for free. He was really upset with my sister's behavior back then and gave her and our parents a hard time about it. He flat out refused to represent Shona. I don't think he and Mom have spoken civilly since. The only time I've seen them together was at Shona's funeral. I think Uncle Albert was a bit disappointed you weren't there that day. I wasn't even in the country, Megan. I was helping out a crew filming wildlife down in South Georgia. Ever since they got stuck there during the Argentinian invasion, well, they prefer us to stay nearby with the ship if possible. I didn't hear about Shona's accident until 3 months after her funeral when we got back to the UK. I bumped into Toby, whatever his name is, down in Falmouth, and he told me about it. While I explained, Megan pulled me up and brushed off my suit, getting dust everywhere. No, that's my suit. Some people, honestly. Come on, Billy, Megan insisted. Let's head to the reception before the line breaks up. With Megan holding my arm firmly, I realized that whether I liked it or not, Megan had decided I was going to my daughter's wedding reception. Against my better judgment, I must have given in. I have to admit, it was probably the alcohol I'd had in the past 24 hours that clouded my judgment enough to agree to Megan's request. Yeah, well, I should explain. When Shona and I first split up, I didn't handle it well. In fact, I ended up spending a few days in custody for taking revenge on Shona's new man. I gave him a beating. It might have felt good in the moment, but it turned out to be a bad move. The confrontation didn't end like I expected, and I ended up getting beat up pretty bad. Unfortunately, Shona got caught in the middle somehow, and she ended up in the emergency room. That led to me being locked up and court orders in both the US and the UK banning me from being near Shona, pretty much forever. Anyway, I can assure you I never laid a finger on my wife. Well, not that I know of. That'll make sense later, I'm sure. Where was I? Oh yeah. After the courts were done with me, I ended up being an ex-convict, labeled as a troublemaker and someone who mistreated his wife. They even took away my rights as a parent to Tamsin while I was still in a US prison. It wasn't a pleasant experience, to say the least. Honestly, nothing seemed to go right for me during that time. Being labeled an ex-convict didn't help my career either, especially when it came to getting a work visa for the US. Try explaining that kind of record to the authorities. Despite all that, Shona, with the help of the British legal system, demanded financial support from me for Tamsin until she turned 18. I'm not proud to admit it, but after getting beaten down by the system, I turned to drinking for a while. Thankfully, I didn't become a complete mess or a full-blown alcoholic. It's probably more about my genetics than any strong willpower if you catch my drift. Still, I needed a little something to get through those tough days. You still working in the film industry, Billy? Megan asked, guiding me slowly down the stairs and into the main foyer of the establishment. Not really, Megan, I replied. These days, I'm mostly working in shipping. I spend a lot of time as a seaman on research vessels, though I still do some filming. It's useful for them to have an extra experienced cameraman on board to document things. Sometimes I'm the only cameraman on the ship. So, you gave up on Hollywood then? Megan, I never really worked for the big names. The best I got was as a cameraman for secondary units, mostly on average films. Unfortunately, my wife was more popular with the directors and producers than my work ever was. Shona always wanted to be a star, Billy. You knew that before you married her. Yeah, but I never imagined she'd go to such lengths to chase her dream. Oh, look at that crowd! We had reached the hotel foyer, where guests were lining up to join the formal receiving line before entering the function room where Tamsin's wedding reception was being held. I thought that the witch, Megan and Shona's mother, had organized this event, going all out for it. She had even bigger ideas than my ex-wife did. While the witch had arranged our wedding, it wasn't as extravagant as this one. Just to note, the witch and I were never each other's biggest fans, so I was worried my presence at this reception could go really wrong. Once I blended into the crowd, I felt less exposed. Still, some guests did double takes when they recognized me, probably from Shona's and my own wedding years ago. I knew I had a few allies out there, but they'd keep quiet. The Stone family usually stuck together. Eventually, the crowd thinned, and the witch spotted me. Her face turned red, and I half expected steam to come out of her ears. Despite my protests, Megan dragged me to the beginning of the receiving line. Tamsin's new husband was stunned when Megan introduced him to his bride's father. He didn't know what to do or say. I shook his limp hand. Tamsin was equally shocked, if not more. Her eyes widened as she looked at me, like they were about to pop out of her head. Honestly, I don't think she even knew who I was until Megan told her husband that I was Tamsin's father. I decided to say, "Hi, kiddo, been a while since I bounced you on my knee." Then I gently kissed the back of her hand. I thought about giving Tamsin a hug, but I worried she might faint. Tamsin stammered out, "But," before Megan nudged me along. Next, I saw the witch's sidekick, George. He recognized me and handled it pretty well, or so I thought. "William, we didn't expect— Well, this is a surprise. How did you— Billy's my guest, Dad. If he's here, I'm here too," Megan cut in. I wondered if Megan had even talked to Tamsin. It didn't seem like there was time. "I never doubted it, Megan," he replied. "William is welcome here today. I was just surprised he's in the country. Your mother said he was working down in the Antipodes." "I've been working in the Antarctic, sir," I said, out of habit. "My ship docked in New Zealand 5 weeks ago." "See, Megan, your mother did try to reach William. You got her message, right, William? You're welcome here today, my boy," George said, looking between Megan and me. Despite his assurance, I was pretty sure there was no message. Down in the Antarctic, communication is usually good, except for when the weather's bad. Even though George said otherwise, I was sure I hadn't been on the guest list. The fact that my ex-mother-in-law wasn't in the receiving line when we got to her spot confirmed it. I kind of wondered if she had hurried off to call the police or something. Tamsin's new in-laws were polite and pleasant, but clearly very confused. They didn't exactly look like they had seen a ghost. They seemed more shocked to be shaking hands with one, if you ask me. It was all pretty amusing from where I stood, but it did make me wonder what they'd been told about Tamsin's father. Most of the other guests had no idea who I was, so they mostly looked at us with curiosity, probably wondering why Megan had chosen to watch the wedding ceremony from the minstrel's gallery as we left the receiving line. Like everyone else, I grabbed a glass of bubbly from a passing waitress and downed it in one gulp. Megan told me to slow down, very clearly, after I grabbed a second glass. Then Sir Albert Stone, the big shot of the family, appeared through the crowd. I couldn't help but wonder why Uncle Albert wasn't in the receiving line, considering he's basically the head honcho of the whole family. "William, my boy, it's great to see you here today. Hyacinth, the witch, made me think you were abroad and couldn't come," Albert said, offering his hand for me to shake. I can't say I ever really liked the old guy. Megan said he took my side during the messy end of my marriage, so I had to rethink my feelings toward him a bit. "How do you do, sir?" I replied as I shook his hand. "Nice to see you again." "Capital, capital," Albert grinned back at me. I'm not exactly sure what capital is supposed to mean, but I remembered it was Uncle Albert's go-to phrase for just about anything, as long as things were going his way, that is. Right then, Tamsin showed up, apparently done with her part in the receiving line. Actually, she rudely squeezed her way between Uncle Albert and me. The look on her face clearly showed she wasn't happy to see me. "You've got some nerve showing up here. What do you want? Money or something? Or are you just trying to embarrass me?" Tamsin asked, surprisingly quietly. I should clarify that Tamsin's words and tone were straight out of the witch's playbook. It wasn't really my daughter talking, but rather a Tamsin who'd been influenced by the witch since she was little. Knowing that, I wasn't mad at Tamsin for her attitude toward me. It just confirmed what I'd always suspected. I glanced at my daughter, then at Albert, and finally at Megan standing beside me. "I told you this wasn't a good idea, Megan. I better leave now," I said, turning to go. "Now, hold on a second, young man," Albert called out loudly enough for almost everyone nearby to hear, and with enough authority to stop me in my tracks. I turned back, curious about what the old guy had to say. "Tamsin, your father traveled almost halfway across the world to be here for your big day. The least you can do is treat him with some respect," Albert said. Actually, Albert's statement wasn't entirely true. I usually spent summers in the UK. Most of my work on ships and with natural history was in Antarctic waters, but there wasn't much going on down there during that time of year. My daughter seemed, well, confused, I guess you could say. She looked from me to her uncle, then at all the people watching, and back at me again. Then she said, "I'm sorry, Father. Your unexpected presence caught me off guard. You've never really shown much interest in my life. And where on earth did you get that idea, Tamsin?" Albert boomed. "Let me tell you, young lady, your father has kept a close eye on your life. He's even risked getting arrested just to be a part of important moments in your life. Isn't that right, young man?" I'm sorry, sir, I started to say, but Albert kept going. He was there for your school award ceremonies, even though he could have been in trouble. And he was also there for your college graduation. You walked right past your father at your graduation without even realizing he was there. He knew who you were, but you didn't recognize him. Luckily, neither did your mother, which probably saved your father from legal trouble. I didn't know you were there, Uncle Albert, Tamsin said cautiously. I wasn't there as often as I would have liked, Tamsin. Your mother and I had our disagreements. You know that. But I had people who kept an eye on you over the years, and they could spot your father. It wouldn't have been good if one of them accidentally blew his cover while your mother was around. I suggest, Tamsin, that you put aside any imagined differences with your father. His reputation, or rather how you see him, has suffered because of circumstances and your mother's poor judgment. Let's have a truce for this special day, shall we? At that point, my daughter seemed embarrassed. If you say so, Uncle, Tamsin reluctantly agreed, then added, but I can't help but wonder why he's here today. With that, Tamsin turned away from me and walked into the crowd. After watching her leave, Albert turned to me. William, I'm afraid your daughter has only heard one side of the story about your divorce. It didn't help that you and Hyacinth never got along in the first place. I was never good enough for Shona in her mother's eyes, sir, I responded. No one would have been good enough for Hyacinth, William. Even my brother doesn't meet her standards. But it seems Hyacinth might be giving up. She's up there on the platform, apparently rearranging the seating plan at the head table. Sure enough, when I looked, the witch, with her husband George stumbling alongside, seemed to be adjusting the place settings. As we watched, I noticed one of the photographers approach them. The witch had a brief conversation with him, then, apparently satisfied with her changes, they left the platform. They're getting ready for the group photos, Billy. We should go, Megan whispered to me. No, you go, Megan. Tamsin isn't happy I'm here. Plus, I'd stick out in the photos without a costume. It wouldn't fit. Billy, don't argue, Megan. I'm about to leave anyway. I knew this was a bad idea. Despite protests from Megan and Albert, they left me alone and went outside for the photo session. To my relief, most of the other guests also went into the hotel gardens to watch or participate. I took the chance to go up to the platform and make some changes. Sure enough, the witch had seated me next to Tamsin's new husband. But considering my daughter's mood and the fact that I hadn't met the young man before, I thought that might cause problems. And Megan, Uncle Albert, and his wife, my only visible allies, were far down the table. So I moved Tamsin's grandfather back to that spot, where I assumed he was originally placed. Then I put my hastily written card next to Megan's at the end of the table. It seemed like a safer arrangement. When Megan returned from the photo shoot, she acted like a spoiled child for a bit. It had been a while since I'd seen her do that, and I found it oddly amusing. I guess she was upset because I didn't join the photo shoot. Well, if that's how you're going to be, I'll just head to the bar, I said, cutting off Megan's fake protest. You better not, or else, Megan started. Or else what, Megan? I interrupted. I don't know. Maybe kiss you. I always wanted to, but never had the guts. I knew Shona's little sister had a crush on me, but hearing Megan admit it caught me off guard. Geez, Megan, I figured you'd have outgrown those teenage crushes by now. Oh, I did. I even thought I found the one. But turns out all that glitters ain't gold. And what you see ain't always what you get. Only after I divorced the jerk did I realize what my sister carelessly tossed aside. I'm not sure I follow, Megan. Good. A confused man is a safe one, she grinned. Let's go. Looks like they're sitting down to eat. The head table was unusually long, and Megan and I had been placed further down. I reversed the witch's changes, much to her annoyance. It was fun for me. She didn't protest, but shot me a nasty look. Albert sat next to Megan. I thought Hyacinth, he started to say as we took our seats. I thought her original plan would have been more diplomatic, sir, I cut in. Capital, capital. Always knew Hyacinth misjudged you, my boy. Anyway, drop the formality. I'm Bertie to family. During the meal, Albert kept me engaged in conversation, almost ignoring everyone else except Megan, who was seated between us. He grilled me about my travels, making me feel like I was on the witness stand. Well, he was a fancy lawyer, used to questioning people. Well, let's see how they handle this, Albert remarked, leaning back in his chair as the master of ceremonies called for silence for the formal toasts. Tamsin's grandfather, who had given her away and presumably footed the bill, stood up and gave a short welcome speech. Then, to my surprise, he called on the bride's father to speak and toast the newlyweds. I could tell from the witch and Tamsin's faces that this wasn't part of the plan, and it wasn't well received. Caught off guard, I had to quickly gather my thoughts and speak. Honestly, I can't remember much of what I said. I think I started with something about unforeseen circumstances, but then I began talking about Tamsin and sharing funny stories from her life. Somehow it turned into a good speech, and I had the whole room laughing. Even the witch cracked a smile at one point. Realizing I was going over the time limit, I toasted the newlyweds and passed the spotlight to the groom. "That was amazing, Billy. How long did you rehearse that?" Megan asked as I sank into my seat. "Did it sound all right?" I asked, still surprised I pulled it off. "Capital, capital, my boy," Albert chimed in. "With a speech like that, you could make a fortune as a public speaker." Looking at the chubby Albert, I figured he knew a thing or two about public speaking and felt relieved. After that, it seemed like a never-ending parade of people standing up and giving long, dull speeches. They toasted just about everyone, including the Queen, though I'm not sure why she was involved. Maybe someone was trying to wrap up the boring speeches. I noticed none of them could match the humor of my own speech. "Come on, my boy. I've got a spot saved for us," Albert said as people started leaving the dining room. At that moment, I started to suspect that Megan and Albert had planned my day beforehand. They seemed to know what they were doing and worked together seamlessly. Albert's wife didn't say much to me, but she smiled whenever our eyes met. With Megan guiding me, we went to a table near the bar, roped off like a VIP area in a fancy nightclub. I always thought that was a bit pretentious and felt awkward sitting there. A young woman, who seemed to be Albert's personal waitress, took our drink orders while everyone else had to wait in line at the bar. It was hard for them to get her attention. There was a similar VIP area on the other side of the room, but it was empty for now. Later, I saw the witch, her husband, and the groom's parents hanging out there. After we got our drinks, Sir Albert Stone started chatting with everyone. Several relatives from the Stone family, some of whom I remembered from my own wedding, would show up and introduce their kids to Uncle Albert. After paying their respects to him, they'd blend back into the crowd. The whole charade bored me to tears and seemed to drag on for an eternity. Albert kept repeating his favorite phrase, "capital, capital." He'd even throw in a third capital for good measure. Honestly, if it hadn't been so absurd, it might have been comical. I tried to ignore the spectacle, and I probably would have left if Megan hadn't been holding onto my arm tightly. Albert seemed determined to make sure everyone knew or was reminded that I was Tamsin's biological father. It felt like he was trying to change my status from family outcast. Every time I tried to divert my attention by talking to Megan, Albert would introduce another family member, whether I knew them or not. There was a brief break in the display of flattery when Tamsin and her new husband took to the dance floor. Luckily, I wasn't called upon to dance, which suited me just fine. I'm not great at formal dancing, especially when all eyes are on me and my partner. "I think that's everyone," Albert said with a sigh of relief as the last family group left our area. "Now, my boy, we need to address the serious matter of your daughter's disrespectful behavior earlier. That girl has some nerve. It might have been helpful if you had disciplined her properly when she was younger. She needed it. George was always too soft with Shona, and with young Megan here, too." "Cheers, Uncle Albert," Megan muttered sarcastically. "Oh, come on, Megan, it wasn't that bad," I said. "But you were quite the troublemaker sometimes, Megan. Gave your parents quite a runaround," Uncle Albert added. "I never caused as much trouble as Shona did, Uncle." No argument there, Megan, but if William had disciplined Shona properly from the start, things might have been easier for everyone, even himself, Albert remarked. "With Shona, I probably would have spent most of my time in jail, Albert," I chimed in. "Yeah, you're probably right about that, William. Shona was a handful and often lacked good judgment and conscience," Albert admitted. "Often? More like all the time," Megan quipped. "Fair point. Anyway, it's time to mend things with your daughter, William," Albert said, signaling for the waitress. He whispered something to her, and she disappeared. A few minutes later, Albert stood up abruptly and said, "Let's not do this in front of everyone. It might get messy." He led us away, and the crowd seemed to part for him as we walked. I had a feeling the day was planned, especially when Albert led us into a smaller, nearly empty function room. What was odd was that the young man guarding the room, who removed a rope barring the entrance, was the same one I had tipped earlier to access the minstrel's gallery. The room was set up like a lounge bar, without the bar itself. There were large sofas, and in one corner sat 3 people, 2 men and a woman. They seemed out of place to me, not part of the wedding party. They lacked the white carnations worn by the guests. I had managed to snag one before the service started. The woman appeared efficient and attractive like a secretary. The two men were smartly dressed, but not overly so. One looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. The other was a stranger. Ignoring them, Albert headed for a group of sofas. As we sat down, the waitress brought more drinks. "Uncle Albert," I said, though he wasn't really my uncle. "If we keep drinking like this, I'll be wasted before the night's over." "Drunks fall into categories," Albert replied. "You're the happy drunk type." He was right. I used to drink a lot, but not anymore. My wife wouldn't like it. I was really curious how he knew so much about me. We didn't run in the same circles. I'd only met him a handful of times. "You seem to know a lot about me, sir." "Of course, young man. After what happened, I felt responsible for keeping tabs on you, making sure you stayed out of trouble." "I don't get it, sir." "Drop the formalities, William. I'm on your side, always have been. Megan told you that, right?" I must have nodded, because he continued. "Capital, just hold tight a little longer and things will make sense, hopefully. I also hope you'll forgive me for not acting sooner. Now you've lost me. Bertie." My response made him smile briefly, but then his attention shifted. The witch, George, Tamsin, and her husband entered, sitting across from us. Albert glanced at the door, expecting someone else. "What's going on, Bertie? We have guests," the witch interrupted. "Please, Hyacinth. Your meddling caused this. Shona made a mistake, and you talked her out of admitting it." "I don't know what you're talking about." The witch began to argue, but George silenced her. "Be quiet, Hyacinth. Bertie's right." I was surprised. This was unexpected. Then another member of the Stone clan, dressed in black with a collar, walked in. I recognized him immediately. There was this Roman Catholic priest named Father Connor, obviously Irish, but I never quite figured out his connection to the Stone family. Despite the difference in faith, Father Connor held a similar position of respect like Sir Albert Stone. While Albert was approached by the crowd in the main hall, I noticed Father Connor making rounds among the family. When Albert stood up, I followed suit as Father Connor approached and shook my hand. "I'm glad you came today, William. That speech surprised your daughter. You seem quite familiar with her life," Father Connor said, stealing a glance at Tamsin, who looked embarrassed. "Thank you, Father. I hope you're doing well," I replied. "Doing as the good Lord wishes, William. Megan, have you been avoiding me?" Father Connor turned his attention to Megan, and we waited until he finished before sitting again. Uncle Albert cleared his throat, signaling to get to the point, but Father Connor spoke first. "Bertie, you understand the rules of confidentiality in confession?" he asked. "Absolutely, Joe. I was bound by them too until recently. But I may have found a solution to our dilemma," Albert replied. "Understood. I can't reveal anything said to me in confidence," Father Connor reminded. Albert turned to Tamsin. "Imagine this as a courtroom, Tamsin. You've taken an oath," he said with a friendly look. "Yes, Uncle Bertie, but I don't—" Tamsin started to respond. "Tamsin, I don't expect you to get it now. Hopefully it'll all make sense soon. If not, this whole thing will be a waste. Just answer my questions as best you can. What you'll tell us won't hold up in court anyway. Now, will you play along?" "Sure thing, Uncle Bertie. Now, I want you to tell us everything you know about your parents' split." "Wait a sec, Bertie." I tried to interrupt. "Hush, Billy. This is my show," Albert scolded me. I was surprised by the reprimand, not so much by Albert's stern tone, but because he called me Billy. "Now, Tamsin, please," Albert urged. "Albert, she was just a baby then." "You're asking too much," the witch protested. "You might be right, Hyacinth," Albert agreed. "Why don't you tell us? You were there and old enough to understand." I don't think I can." The witch hesitated, sounding unsure for the first time. "But I'm sure you can. You've criticized William for years," Albert pressed. Tamsin, stirred by Albert's confrontation, looked determined. "I'll do it," she began, but Albert interrupted her. It seemed Albert insisted the witch tell the story. I didn't understand why, but I guessed Albert's initial request to Tamsin was a legal tactic. Legal stuff often baffles us regular folks. Eventually, the witch gave in, avoiding eye contact with me the whole time. I won't repeat Hyacinth's exact words. Some parts she said were out of order, and a lot was just personal mother-daughter stuff that didn't matter much to the story. But here are the main points she shared. Shona and William were in America for a few months, working on a movie. Shona was acting, and William was helping with the camera. The director thought Shona was great and said she'd be famous soon. Everything seemed good until one night. We got a call saying William got drunk and attacked Shona, and another guy with a chair leg while they were rehearsing. Luckily, the guy managed to stop him, but Shona got hurt. The police arrested William, but I took Tamsin back to the UK before the trial. I'm not sure how long he was in jail, but he got sent back to the UK afterward. After what happened, Shona divorced him. She was supposed to be in a big movie, but her face wasn't healed in time, so she lost the chance. Because of what William did, Shona's career suffered, and she was scared of him when he came back. We had to get a court order to keep him away from her. There's been legal stuff since then, but we haven't seen William outside of court since that night. The witch, looking satisfied, leaned back on the couch, signaling the end of her story. However, I noticed she avoided making eye contact with me. It seemed like she couldn't face me because she knew her story wasn't the whole truth about what happened in the States that weekend. I didn't just sit quietly and listen to her story like Albert wanted. I kept wanting to correct or add things she missed. Megan, holding onto my arm tightly, seemed to sense whenever I got frustrated. She'd squeeze my arm, and at the same time, Albert would signal me to stay quiet. "Seems like you're a violent drunk, William," Albert remarked. "I find that hard to believe, especially since you've managed to stay out of trouble for over 20 years. I nodded in agreement with Albert's estimation. "It's also strange that I haven't heard any reports of you losing control while drinking. I've had people keeping an eye on you for years. At one point, you did drink quite a bit." "I believe William's version of events might offer a different perspective. Why don't you tell us what happened that weekend, William?" I let go of Megan's arm and leaned forward, wanting to speak without interruption or distraction. Then I focused my gaze on Tamsin, knowing she needed to hear the truth. "What your grandmother said was completely wrong from the start. A friend asked me to be a cameraman for the second unit on a film. It was an action movie set in the mountains. My specialty has always been filming long shots and using telephoto lenses. They paid for Shona's flight to the States because I insisted she come with me. I thought it would be a nice vacation for her. The film crew had taken over a winter resort, probably getting it at a discount since it was off-season. I never expected them to ask Shona to step in for an actor who got injured on the first day of filming. They had to rewrite the role to make it fit for a female character. Shona had done some TV ads before, so she was in the right place at the right time. It was cheaper for them to use her than to find and fly in another actor. They decided to cut her skiing scene due to past mishaps. I had no idea what was happening behind my back, even though I knew Larry Parker, the director, was involved with some young crew member. He was known for his affairs in the industry. I trusted him as a friend, thinking friends don't betray each other like that. We finished filming on location that Friday. The rest of the scenes were supposed to be shot in the studio, and Shona's character wasn't needed for those. It was just a small role. On Friday afternoon, my crew and I packed up our equipment to return it. We finished much earlier than expected, and I got back to our cabin around 5:30, much earlier than I thought I would. When I arrived, the place was deserted. No wife, no child asleep. All I found was a note. This note. I took out my wallet and handed the crumpled paper to Tamsin, but Albert took it instead. He carefully unfolded it and read the words aloud. "Billy, I'm leaving with Larry. He loves me and he's taking me to Hollywood to become a star. Please don't try to stop us or cause a scene. Shona." "Short and straight to the point," Albert remarked. "Go on, William, but I think we all know where this is headed. Filming on location was finished, you say?" "Yes, sir, it was," I confirmed. "That contradicts the story of Shona rehearsing for the next day," Albert noted. "But continue, lad. Let's get to the messy part." "You're only taking his word for that," the witch interjected. "How do we know he's not lying?" "Valid point, Hyacinth," Albert acknowledged. "Let's verify a few details." He turned to one of the strangers. "Reginald, if you please." The unfamiliar man stood up and approached with a briefcase. "Sir," he addressed Albert when he was close enough. "Do you have copies of the film's shooting script?" Reginald didn't respond verbally. He handed Albert a folder from the briefcase. Albert didn't bother to open it, just placed it on the coffee table. "If anyone wants to challenge William's story, they'll find it backed up by this file. Now, William, please continue." The interruption threw me off for a moment. I had to collect myself before proceeding. When I found that note, I was furious. Yeah, I had a drink or two to calm down. But then I realized I wasn't supposed to be back at the camp until later that evening, and I remembered seeing Larry's car parked in front of his lodge when we arrived back at the camp. So it hit me that Shona and Larry might have expected to be long gone before I found the note. I didn't know what the right move was in that situation, but I knew I needed an explanation from Shona about what she thought she was doing. I was sure Parker would drop her as soon as he found someone else. I couldn't believe she forgot everything I warned her about him. I didn't introduce her to Parker without preparing her. When he turned on the charm, even the birds in the trees flew to him. I found them in Larry's kitchen. I wasn't interested in Parker. I could handle him later. He couldn't hide from me for long if he wanted to stay in the industry. I wanted Shona to take my warning seriously. But Parker misjudged my intentions. Maybe he had other spouses come after him before. He came at me like a bull in a china shop. I dodged and he crashed into the back door, breaking the glass. I thought he was trying to escape. In court, they said I broke the glass to get into the cabin. They ignored the fact that the broken glass was outside and I didn't have any cuts, but Larry did. I didn't remember much when I woke up and for a couple of years after, but now I remember everything in detail. I don't know how to describe Parker's fighting style. Once he recovered, he charged at me again. I dodged again, but I managed to punch him as he passed. I thought it would calm him down. It was a big mistake. He changed direction and crashed into Shona, and they both fell. Shona was sitting on a chair beside the breakfast bar. That chair didn't make it. I thought Parker was knocked out, and Shona didn't look good either. So I pulled Parker off her and helped Shona up. I remember Shona looking at me. She seemed dazed. And then everything went black. I woke up, 4 days later, chained to a hospital bed. I couldn't remember that day or the days before it. The memories came back slowly over the years. Well, Tamsin, those are my memories of that day. Everything that's happened since then has been out of my hands. I don't know who hit me or what they used. I think it was Larry Parker who broke your mom's cheekbone when he crashed into her. He probably hit me too with a broken chair leg. I have no clue why they blame me for the fight. And your mom made sure I couldn't get close enough to ask her about it, with the help of lawyers. I heard Larry Parker was found dead in a motel room while I was still in the legal system. I suspect he messed with the wrong guy's spouse. Some Americans can get pretty possessive and vindictive. And they're not shy about using guns. That's all I've got to say. I don't want to sound bitter towards your mom. Megan grabbed onto my arm again and surprised me with a kiss on the cheek. Tamsin sat silently, staring at me as if trying to read my mind. Then she looked at Albert. You know the truth, Uncle Albert. Mom told you, didn't she? She did, but we're bound by confidentiality, Father Connor added. I can't reveal what's said in the confessional. Tamsin, I'm sure your mom wouldn't lie to you, the witch said. Tamsin stood up and glared at her grandmother, eye to eye. My mom never really explained what happened back then. Whenever I asked, she'd dodge the question. Tamsin marched over to the strangers and confronted the man I recognized. I think I've seen you before, she said. Yeah, you might have, he replied. I've seen you at my school and in Bristol when I was at university. Since my uncle mentioned he's had someone watch over my dad and these two work for him, I'm guessing you've been keeping tabs on both of us, right? Exactly, miss. I'm a retired cop. Your uncle hires me when he needs help. Tamsin grinned at me, then back at the man. I bet you've looked into that night closely, right? The man nodded. Do you think my dad's telling the truth? As far as I know, he is. Thanks, officer. What's your name? Sergeant White, retired, but you can call me Chalky. Why didn't Uncle Bertie just send you to tell me the truth? I just do what I'm asked. Can you explain why Uncle Albert kept quiet for so long? I can only guess, miss. Maybe your uncle's protecting someone from being charged with lying. But why would she lie in the first place? I don't know, miss. But think about it. A film producer can't help an actress if he's in jail for hurting someone. It all makes sense now, Tamsin said. How long have you known my dad? She asked me. Not long, but I had a feeling, I replied. I never believed your mom's story in court. Maybe she got it from Parker. Tamsin turned to Chalky. Would you and your friends join us for the evening? They thanked her and left for the main room. Tamsin came back to us, looking furious. Please, Grandma, don't talk to me now, she said. Grandpa, could you take Grandma and handle the guests? Paul and I will join soon. George took her away, and Tamsin hugged Father Connor and Uncle Albert before turning to Megan and me. Can I steal Dad away for a bit, Aunt Megan? I need to talk to him alone, Tamsin said, then turned to her husband. Paul, Aunt Megan loves dancing. Paul got the hint, and Megan did too. As they headed to the main room, Tamsin and I, with her guiding me like Megan had done all day, walked into the hotel's gardens. For a while, Tamsin didn't say anything, just held onto my arm tightly. Finally, she spoke up. How can I apologize to you, Dad? Confused, I asked, apologize for what, kiddo? She stopped walking and I turned to face her. For the way I talked to you earlier, I guess. But I feel like there's a lot more I should apologize for. If only I knew exactly what. I'd feel better. The truth is, kiddo, you're the one owed apologies. You and I are the ones who've been wronged. Now we just need to make up for lost time, I reassured her. You don't seem very mad, Dad. I've learned over the years that getting angry doesn't fix things, Tamsin. It just makes matters worse. Trust me, I've been there. But Grandma, your grandmother never liked me, Tamsin, from the start of your mom and my relationship. Why? What did you do to upset her? I came from the wrong side of the tracks, Tamsin, and I was dating her daughter. Plain and simple snobbery. Will I have you watching over my shoulder all the time? I hope so, kiddo. But I won't be around all the time. Most of my work is down in Antarctica. I'm there for a big part of the year. I don't think Aunt Megan will like that. She seems to have a bit of a crush on you. What about her husband? Didn't she say she was married? I asked, bending the truth a bit. I just wanted some background without asking directly. Tamsin giggled. Oh yeah, he did. Handsome guy, but a bit too quick with his fists. What do you mean? They had a fight, and he hit Megan. Damn, how did she handle it? Remember when Aunt Megan told you about getting bullied at school? Yeah, I remember. I took her to the gym and taught her self-defense. Well, Megan's ex-husband felt the effects of your lesson. They had to take him away in an ambulance. Dang, did Megan face any consequences? With Uncle Bertie on the case, her ex got 2 years of probation. Well, that's a relief. I wouldn't want to cause Megan any trouble. She was a good kid. Do you have a thing for Aunt Megan, Dad? It's pretty obvious she's got a soft spot for you. I've always liked Megan, Tamsin, but she's your mom's little sister and I have to keep my feelings in check. You sound just like Uncle Bertie, Dad. Darn it, Dad. There, I said it, and it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. From now on, you're my dad, okay? Sounds good to me, kiddo. Tamsin hugged me tightly, kissed me on the cheek, and said, I'm gonna love hearing you call me kiddo, Dad. But as I was saying, my mom's gone, Dad. And so is Aunt Megan. I've always liked her. Does that mean you approve, Tamsin? I asked. You bet, Dad. Go for it. Don't get ahead of yourself, Tamsin. Megan sees me more as a big brother type, not a romantic interest. Those are two different things. Uncle Bertie strikes again. Come on, let's head back inside. I want to show you off to all my friends. What about your new husband? Paul's got me all to himself on a cruise ship for 2 weeks. He's not complaining. We went back inside, and I was introduced to what felt like a ton of young people. I didn't see Megan around, the one I was hoping would rescue me, but eventually Bertie showed up by my side. Tamsin was a bit hesitant, but she finally agreed to let me go outside with Bertie for a walk. Truth be told, I figured Bertie needed a cover story to sneak out for a cigar. His quiet wife apparently doesn't like him smoking. We went out on the patio and Bertie lit up his cigar. You know I would never have made Shona sit through all that, right, William? He said. Bertie, I might be daft, but I'm not stupid. She was quite something, wasn't she? Yeah, she was. And she was terrified of going to prison, especially in America. I wonder if she could have been jailed for perjury. That cheekbone injury must have been really bad. In a British court, I doubt it. But in America, who knows? Hyacinth had Shona scared she'd end up behind bars anyway. And Shona saw how your trial went down. I've read the transcripts, William. It was some sketchy justice. Bertie, by the time I figured things out, I was about to be released anyway. An appeal might have sent Shona in the opposite direction, especially with Larry Parker dead. You know how some legal types are, looking for someone to blame. You're a softie, William. Coming from you? I retorted. Albert took one last puff of his cigar and put it out. Don't tell the missus about this, or I'll be in trouble. Let's head back in before Megan gets antsy again. That girl's got her eye on you, young man. I've noticed, Bertie. I've noticed. Capital, capital, he said as we headed back inside the function room. It wasn't until Tamsin and Paul took off for their first night in the honeymoon suite that I realized I hadn't sorted out a place to crash for the night. My plan was to head back to the cottage I rented on the south coast. Don't sweat it. I've got an extra bed in my room, Megan offered. Megan, aren't you moving a bit fast? Seems like jumping the gun, I said. Hey, I've seen what you're capable of, and I want in this time, Megan replied. What do you mean, you've seen me in action? I asked. You said it yourself, Billy. I'm good at sneaking around, and I've watched you more than once. Your little hideout in the woods wasn't as secret as you thought, she said. Geez, that's creepy, Megan. You want to see creepy? I'll show you creepy. Let's go up to my room now. I woke up feeling something on my chest. Opening my eyes, I saw Megan's face smiling down at me. Recovered yet? She asked. Geez, Megan, you don't do things halfway, do you? I only had one night, Billy. I needed to make sure you knew what I was offering. permanently. Is that a proposal, Megan? I asked. You bet, and I can get Father Connor here in a jiffy to make it official if you're game. But Father Connor is Catholic, Megan. We're Anglican, right? Details? Details? I thought you were a sailor, Billy. I am, but what's that got to do with anything? Any port in a storm, lover. I'd marry you under any circumstances. Plus, I've got these. Megan showed me an envelope. And what's in that envelope, Megan? 2 tickets for a cruise in a luxury suite, all paid for by my generous uncle. And it just so happens to be the same cruise where your daughter and her new hubby are honeymooning. Voila! You get to bond with your daughter by day and spend every night with me. Megan, when did you and Bertie come up with this plan? To be honest, Billy, Bertie came up with the idea after Shona's funeral. But the part about me seducing you, that was all my doing. So what do you think about the cruise? I saw the longing look on Megan's face. I think I'll enjoy the break, sweetheart. But we won't be able to get a marriage license before the ship sails. Don't worry, Billy. It's registered in Bermuda. What's the significance of that? You'll see soon enough, hubby. Now, how about another stroll on the deck before breakfast? Megan grinned. I grinned back at her. We just made it in time for the last breakfast sitting that morning. Megan and I didn't tie the knot on the ship. We wanted to, but Bertie's wife put her foot down. Beatrice may seem quiet, but she's got a strong will. Considering who she's married to, that's not surprising. She organized our wedding, probably with Bertie footing the bill. It wasn't as big as Tamsin's, but we didn't want a huge affair anyway. We would have preferred a small wedding with just Tamsin and Paul as witnesses. The witch didn't come, but Megan's dad walked her down the aisle. He even joked, "Seems to be a habit, William," as he gave me her hand. Bertie was all smiles, claiming credit for bringing us together in his speech. I guess he did, in a way. But I think Megan would have found a way to be with me even without sneaking into Tamsin's wedding. When Megan sets her mind to something, she gets it done. Even Bertie listens to her. Her only problem is she takes forever to decide things, like whether to get up or take another walk on the deck. It messes with my work schedule, and my back ain't what it used to be, no matter what Megan thinks. I don't work in the South Seas anymore. Bertie knew someone who knew someone in the BBC's wildlife department. Megan's phone started buzzing with offers for wildlife filming gigs, mostly in the UK and quite lucrative. It's right up my alley. We've decided to skip having kids. With Tamsin's twins on the way, we'll have our hands full. Maybe even a whole soccer team if she and Paul keep at it. We've settled in a cozy bungalow near Tamsin and Paul's place. It's just a short walk, perfect for strolling with a baby carriage. And Bertie got Paul and me into the local golf club. Our Sunday morning golf foursome is now a regular thing. And guess who joins us? George, of course. Now that he and the witch are no longer together, he's like a second grandpa to my daughter. Bertie still holds the top spot, being the family head and all.